Genesis 43. The famine in Canaan got worse, until finally Jacob's family had eaten all the grain they had bought in Egypt. So Jacob said to his sons,
"Go back and buy some more grain."
Judah replied,
The governor strictly warned us that we would not be allowed to see him unless we brought our youngest brother with us. If you let us take Benjamin along, we will go and buy grain, but we won't go without him.
Jacob asked,
"Why did you cause me so much trouble by telling the governor you had another brother?"
They answered,
He asked a lot of questions about us and our family. He wanted to know if you were still alive and if we had any more brothers. All we could do was answer his questions. How could we know he would tell us to bring along our brother?
Then Judah said to his father,
Let Benjamin go with me, and we will leave right away, so that none of us will starve to death. I promise to bring him back safely, and if I don't, you can blame me as long as I live. If we had not wasted all this time, we could already have been there and back twice.
Their father said,
"If Benjamin must go with you, take the governor a gift of some of the best things from our own country, such as perfume, honey, spices, pistachio nuts, and almonds. Also, take along twice the amount of money for the grain, because there must have been some mistake when the money was put back in your sacks. Take Benjamin with you and leave right away. When you go in to see the governor, I pray that God all-powerful will be good to you, and that the governor will let your other brother and Benjamin come back home with you. If I must lose my children, I suppose I must."
The brothers took the gifts, twice the amount of money, and Benjamin. Then they hurried off to Egypt. When they stood in front of Joseph, he saw Benjamin and told the servant in charge of his house,
"Take these men to my house. Slaughter an animal and cook it so they can eat with me at noon."
The servant did as he was told and took the brothers to Joseph's house. But on the way they got worried and started thinking,
We are being taken there because of the money that was put back in our sacks last time. He will arrest us, make us his slaves, and take our donkeys.
So when they arrived at Joseph's house, they said to the servant in charge,
"Sir, we came to Egypt once before to buy grain. But when we stopped for the night, we each found in our grain sacks the exact amount we had paid. We have brought that money back, together with enough money to buy more grain. We don't know who put the money in our sacks."
"It's all right,"
the servant replied.
"Don't worry. The God you and your father worship must have put the money there, because I received your payment in full."
Then he brought Simeon out to them. The servant took them into Joseph's house and gave them water to wash their feet. He also tended their donkeys. The brothers got their gifts ready to give to Joseph at noon, since they had heard they were going to eat there. When Joseph came home, they gave him the gifts they had brought, and they bowed down to him. After Joseph had asked how they were, he said,
"What about your elderly father? Is he still alive?"
They answered,
Your servant, our father, is still alive and well.
and again they bowed down to Joseph. When Joseph looked around and saw his brother Benjamin, he said,
"This must be your youngest brother, the one you told me about. God bless you, my son."
Right away he rushed off to his room and cried because of his love for Benjamin. After washing his face and returning, he was able to control himself and said,
"Serve the meal."
Joseph was served at a table by himself, and his brothers were served at another. The Egyptians sat at yet another table, because Egyptians felt it was disgusting to eat with Hebrews. To the surprise of Joseph's brothers, they were seated in front of him according to their ages, from the oldest to the youngest. They were served food from Joseph's table, and Benjamin was given 5 times as much as each of the others. So Joseph's brothers drank with him and had a good time. Genesis 44. Later, Joseph told the servant in charge of his house,
Fill the men's grain sacks with as much as they can hold, and put their money in the sacks. Also, put my silver cup in the sack of the youngest brother.
The servant did as he was told. Early the next morning, the men were sent on their way with their donkeys. But they had not gone far from the city when Joseph told the servant,
Go after those men. When you catch them, say, My master has been good to you, so why have you stolen his silver cup? Not only does he drink from his cup, but he also uses it to learn about the future. You have done a terrible thing.
When the servant caught up with them, he said exactly what Joseph had told him to say. But they replied,
Sir, why do you say such things? We would never do anything like that.
We even returned the money we found in our grain sacks when we got back to Canaan. So why would we want to steal any silver or gold from your master's house?
If you find that one of us has the cup, then kill him, and the rest of us will become your slaves.
Good, the man replied.
I'll do what you have said, but only the one who has the cup will become my slave. The rest of you can go free.
Each of the brothers quickly put his sack on the ground and opened it. Joseph's servant started searching the sacks, beginning with the one that belonged to the oldest brother. When he came to Benjamin's sack, he found the cup. This upset the brothers so much that they began tearing their clothes in sorrow. Then they loaded their donkeys and returned to the city. When Judah and his brothers got there, Joseph was still at home. So they bowed down to Joseph, who asked them,
What have you done? Didn't you know I could find out?
So, what can we say?
Judah replied,
How can we prove we are innocent? God has shown that we are guilty, and now all of us are your slaves, especially the one who had the cup.
Joseph told them,
I would never punish all of you. Only the one who was caught with the cup will become my slave. The rest of you are free to go home to your father.
Judah went over to Joseph and said,
Sir, you have as much power as the king himself, and I am only your slave. Please don't get angry if I speak. You asked us if our father was still alive, and if we had any more brothers. So we told you, our father is a very old man. In fact, he was already old when Benjamin was born. Benjamin's brother is dead. Now Benjamin is the only one of the two brothers who is still alive, and our father loves him very much. You ordered us to bring him here so you could see him for yourself. We told you that our father would die if Benjamin left him, but you warned us that we could never see you again unless our youngest brother came with us. So we returned to our father and reported what you had said. Later, our father told us to come back here and buy more grain, but we answered, we can't go back to Egypt without our youngest brother. We will never be let in to see the governor unless he is with us. Sir, our father then reminded us that his favorite wife had given birth to 2 sons. One of them was already missing and had not been seen for a long time. My father thinks the boy was torn to pieces by some wild animal, and he said, I am an old man. If you take Benjamin from me and something happens to him, I will die of a broken heart. That's why Benjamin must be with us when I go back to my father. He loves him so much that he will die if Benjamin doesn't come back with me. I promised my father that I would bring him safely home. If I don't, I told my father he could blame me the rest of my life. Sir, I am your slave. Please let me stay here in place of Benjamin, and let him return home with his brothers. How can I face my father if Benjamin isn't with me? I couldn't bear to see my father in such sorrow.
Genesis 45. Since Joseph could no longer control his feelings in front of his servants, he sent them out of the room. When he was alone with his brothers, he told them,
I am Joseph.
Then he cried so loudly that the Egyptians heard him and told about it in the king's palace. Joseph asked his brothers if his father was still alive, but they were too frightened to answer. Joseph told them to come closer to him, and when they did, he said,
Yes, I am your brother Joseph, the one you sold into Egypt. Don't worry or blame yourselves for what you did. God is the one who sent me ahead of you to save lives. There has already been a famine for 2 years, and for 5 more years no one will plow fields or harvest grain. But God sent me on ahead of you to keep your families alive and to save you in this wonderful way. After all, you weren't really the ones who sent me here. It was God. He made me the highest official in the king's court and placed me over all Egypt. Now hurry back and tell my father that his son Joseph says, God has made me ruler of Egypt. Come here as quickly as you can. You will live near me in the region of Goshen with your children and grandchildren, as well as with your sheep, goats, cattle, and everything else you own. I will take care of you there during the next 5 years of famine. But if you don't come, you and your family and your animals will starve to death. All of you, including my brother Benjamin, can tell by what I have said that I really am Joseph. Tell my father about my great power here in Egypt and about everything you have seen. Hurry and bring him here.
Joseph and Benjamin hugged each other and started crying. Joseph was still crying as he kissed each of his other brothers. After this, they started talking with Joseph. When it was told in the palace that Joseph's brothers had come, the king and his officials were happy. So the king said to Joseph,
Tell your brothers to load their donkeys and return to Canaan. Have them bring their father and their families here. I will give them the best land in Egypt, and they can eat and enjoy everything that grows on it. Also tell your brothers to take some wagons from Egypt for their wives and children to ride in, and be sure to have them bring their father. They can leave their possessions behind, because they will be given the best of everything in Egypt.
Jacob's sons agreed to do what the king had said, and Joseph gave them wagons and food for their trip home, just as the king had ordered. Joseph gave some new clothes to each of his brothers, but to Benjamin he gave 5 new outfits and 300 pieces of silver. To his father he sent 10 donkeys loaded with the best things in Egypt, and 10 other donkeys loaded with grain and bread and other food for the return trip. Then he sent his brothers off and told them,
Don't argue on the way home.
Joseph's brothers left Egypt, and when they arrived in Canaan, they told their father that Joseph was still alive and was the ruler of Egypt. But their father was so surprised that he could not believe them. Then they told him everything Joseph had said. When he saw the wagons Joseph had sent, he felt much better and said,
Now I can believe you. My son Joseph must really be alive, and I will get to see him before I die.
Genesis 46. Jacob packed up everything he owned and left for Egypt. On the way, he stopped near the town of Beersheba and offered sacrifices to the God his father Isaac had worshipped. That night, God spoke to him and said,
Jacob. Jacob.
Here I am.
Jacob answered. God said,
I am God, the same God your father worshipped. Don't be afraid to go to Egypt. I will give you so many descendants that one day they will become a nation. I will go with you to Egypt, and later I will bring your descendants back here. Your son Joseph will be at your side when you die.
Jacob and his family set out from Beersheba and headed for Egypt. His sons put him in the wagon that the king had sent for him, and they put their small children and their wives in the other wagons. Jacob's whole family went to Egypt, including his sons, his grandsons, his daughters, and his granddaughters. They took along their animals and everything else they owned. When Jacob went to Egypt, his children who were born in northern Syria also went along with their families. Jacob and his wife Leah had a total of 33 children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren, but 2 of their grandchildren had died in Canaan. Their oldest son Reuben took his sons Hanok, Palu, Hezron, and Carmi. Their son Simeon took his sons Jemuel, Jamin, Ohad, Jachin, Zohar, and Shaul, whose mother was a Canaanite. Their son Levi took his sons Gershon, Kohath, and Merari. Their son Judah took his sons Shelah, Perez, and Zerah. Judah's sons and Onan had died in Canaan. Judah's son Perez took his sons Hezron and Hamel. Their son Issachar took his sons Tola, Puvah, Jashub, and Shimron. Their son Zebulun took his sons Sered, Elon, and Jaleel. Their daughter Dinah also went. Jacob and Zilpah, the servant woman Laban had given his daughter Leah, had a total of 16 children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren. Their son Gad took his sons Ziphion, Haggai, Shunai, Esbon, Eri, Arodi, and Areli. Their son Asher took his sons Imnah, Ishva, Ishvi, and Beriah, who took his sons Heber and Malchiel. Serah, the daughter of Asher, also went. Jacob and Rachel had 14 children and grandchildren. Their son Joseph was already in Egypt, where he had married Asenath, daughter of Potipherah, the priest of Heliopolis. Joseph and Asenath had 2 sons, Manasseh and Ephraim. Jacob and Rachel's son Benjamin took his sons Bela, Becher, Ashbel, Gera, Naaman, Ehi, Rosh, Muppim, Huppim, and Ard. Jacob and Bilhah, the servant woman Laban had given his daughter Rachel, had 7 children and grandchildren. Their son Dan took his son Hushim. Their son Naphtali took his sons Jaziel, Gunai, Jezer, and Shillem. 66 members of Jacob's family went to Egypt with him, not counting his daughters-in-law. Jacob's 2 grandsons who were born there made it a total of 70 members of Jacob's family in Egypt. Jacob had sent his son Judah ahead of him to ask Joseph to meet them in Goshen. So Joseph got in his chariot and went to meet his father. When they met, Joseph hugged his father around the neck and cried for a long time. Jacob said to Joseph,
Now that I have seen you and know you are still alive, I am ready to die.
Then Joseph said to his brothers and to everyone who had come with them,
I must go and tell the king that you have arrived from Canaan. I will tell him that you are shepherds and that you have brought your sheep, goats, cattle, and everything else you own. The king will call you in and ask you what you do for a living. When he does, be sure to say, We are shepherds. Our families have always raised sheep. If you tell him this, He will let you settle in the region of Goshen.
Joseph wanted them to say this to the king because the Egyptians did not like to be around anyone who raised sheep. Genesis 47. Joseph took his 5 brothers to the king and told him,
My father and my brothers have come from Canaan. They have brought their sheep, goats, cattle, and everything else they own to the region of Goshen.
Then he introduced his brothers to the king, who asked them,
What do you do for a living?
Sir, we are shepherds.
Was their answer.
Our families have always raised sheep. But in our country, all the pastures are dried up, and our sheep have no grass to eat. So we, your servants, have come here. Please, let us live in the region of Goshen.
The king said to Joseph,
It's good that your father and brothers have arrived. I will let them live anywhere they choose in the land of Egypt, but I suggest that they settle in Goshen, the best part of our land. I would also like for your finest shepherds to watch after my own sheep and goats.
Then Joseph brought his father Jacob and introduced him to the king. Jacob gave the king his blessing, and the king asked him,
How old are you?
Jacob answered,
I have lived only 130 years, and I have had to move from place to place. My parents and my grandparents also had to move from place to place, but they lived much longer, and their life was not as hard as mine.
Then Jacob gave the king his blessing once again and left. Joseph obeyed the king's orders and gave his father and brothers some of the best land in Egypt near the city of Ramesses. Joseph also provided food for their families. The famine was bad everywhere in Egypt and Canaan, and the people were suffering terribly. So Joseph sold them the grain that had been stored up, and he put the money in the king's treasury. But when everyone had run out of money, the Egyptians came to Joseph and demanded,
Give us more grain! If you don't, we'll soon be dead, because our money's all gone!
If you don't have any money,
Joseph answered,
give me your animals, and I'll let you have some grain.
From then on, they brought him their horses and donkeys and their sheep and goats in exchange for grain. Within a year, Joseph had collected every animal in Egypt. Then the people came to him and said,
Sir, there's no way we can hide the truth from you. We are broke, and we don't have any more animals. We have nothing left except ourselves and our land.
Don't let us starve and our land be ruined. If you'll give us grain to eat and seed to plant, we'll sell ourselves and our land to the king. We'll become his slaves.
The famine became so severe that Joseph finally bought every piece of land in Egypt for the king and made everyone the king's slaves except the priests. The king gave the priests a regular food allowance, so they did not have to sell their land. Then Joseph said to the people,
You and your land now belong to the king. I am giving you seed to plant, but 1/5 of your crops must go to the king. You can keep the rest as seed or as food for your families.
Sir, you have saved our lives.
They answered.
We are glad to be slaves of the king.
Then Joseph made a law that 1/5 of the harvest would always belong to the king. Only the priests did not lose their land. The people of Israel made their home in the land of Goshen, where they became prosperous and had large families. Jacob himself lived there for 17 years before dying at the age of 147. When Jacob knew he did not have long to live, he called in Joseph and said,
If you really love me, you must make a solemn promise not to bury me in Egypt. Instead, bury me in the place where my ancestors are buried.
I will do what you have asked.
Joseph answered.
Will you give me your word?
Jacob asked.
Yes, I will.
Joseph promised. After this, Jacob bowed down and prayed at the head of his bed. Genesis 48. Joseph was told that his father Jacob had become very sick. So Joseph went to see him and took along his 2 sons Manasseh and Ephraim. When Joseph arrived, someone told Jacob,
"Your son Joseph has come to see you."
Jacob sat up in bed, but it took almost all his strength. Jacob told Joseph,
God all-powerful appeared to me at Luz in the land of Canaan, where he gave me his blessing and promised, I will give you a large family with many descendants that will grow into a nation. And I am giving you this land that will belong to you and your family forever.
Then Jacob went on to say,
Joseph, your 2 sons Ephraim and Manasseh were born in Egypt, but I accept them as my own, just as Reuben and Simeon are mine. Any children you have later will be considered yours, but their inheritance will come from Ephraim and Manasseh. Unfortunately, your mother Rachel died in Canaan after we had left northern Syria and before we reached Bethlehem, and I had to bury her along the way.
Jacob was very old and almost blind. He did not recognize the 2 boys, and so he asked Joseph,
Who are these boys?
Joseph answered,
They are my sons. God has given them to me here in Egypt.
Bring them to me,
Jacob said.
I want to give them my blessing.
Joseph brought the boys to him, and he hugged and kissed them. Jacob turned to Joseph and told him,
For many years I thought you were dead, and that I would never see you again. But now God has even let me live to see your children.
Then Joseph made his sons move away from Jacob's knees, and Joseph bowed down in front of him with his face to the ground. After Joseph got up, he brought his 2 sons over to Jacob again. He led his younger son Ephraim to the left side of Jacob, and his older son Manasseh to the right. But before Jacob gave them his blessing, he crossed his arms, putting his right hand on the head of Ephraim and his left hand on the head of Manasseh. Then he gave Joseph his blessing and said,
My grandfather Abraham and my father Isaac worshipped the Lord God. He has been with me all my life, and his angel has kept me safe. Now I pray that he will bless these boys, and that my name and the names of Abraham and Isaac will live on because of him. I ask God to give them many children and many descendants as well.
Joseph did not like it when he saw his father place his right hand on the head of the younger son. So he tried to move his father's right hand from Ephraim's head and place it on Manasseh. Joseph said,
Father, you have made a mistake. This is the older boy. Put your right hand on him.
But his father said,
Son, I know what I am doing. It's true that Manasseh's family will someday become a great nation, but Ephraim will be even greater than Manasseh, because his descendants will become many great nations.
Jacob told him that in the future the people of Israel would ask God's blessings on one another by saying,
I pray for God to bless you as much as he blessed Ephraim and Manasseh.
Jacob put Ephraim's name first to show that he would be greater than Manasseh. After that, Jacob said,
Joseph, you can see that I won't live much longer, but God will be with you and will lead you back to the land he promised our family long ago. Meanwhile, I'm giving you the hillside I captured from the Amorites.
Genesis 49. Jacob called his sons together and said,
My sons, I am Jacob, your father Israel. Come, gather around as I tell your future. Reuben, you are my oldest, born at the peak of my powers. You were an honored leader, uncontrollable as a flood. You slept with my wife and disgraced my bed, so you no longer deserve the place of honor. Simeon and Levi, you are brothers, each a gruesome sword. I never want to take part in your plans or deeds. You slaughtered people in your anger, and you crippled cattle for no reason. Now I place a curse on you because of your fierce anger. Your descendants will be scattered among the tribes of Israel. Judah, you will be praised by your brothers. They will bow down to you as you defeat your enemies. My son, you are a lion ready to eat your victim. You are terribly fierce. No one will bother you. You will have power and rule until nations obey you and come bringing gifts. You will tie your donkey to a choice grapevine and wash your clothes in wine from those grapes. Your eyes are darker than wine, your teeth whiter than milk. Zebulun, you will settle along the seashore and provide safe harbors as far north as Sidon. Issachar, you are a strong donkey resting in the meadows. You found them so pleasant that you worked too hard and became a slave. Dan, you are the tribe that will bring justice to Israel. You are a snake that bites the heel of a horse, making its rider fall. Oh Lord, I am waiting for you to save us. Gad, you will be attacked. Then attack your attackers. Asher, you will eat food fancy enough for a king. Naphtali, you are a wild deer with long lovely fawns. Joseph, you are a fruitful vine growing near a stream and climbing a wall. Enemies attacked with arrows, refusing to show mercy. But you stood your ground, swiftly shooting back with the help of Jacob's God, the all-powerful one. His name is the Shepherd, Israel's mighty rock. Your help came from the God your father worshipped, from God all-powerful. God will bless you with rain and streams from the earth. He will bless you with many descendants. My son, the blessings I give are better than the promise of ancient mountains or eternal hills. Joseph, I pray these blessings will come to you because you are the leader of your brothers. Benjamin, you are a fierce wolf, destroying your enemies morning and evening.
These are the 12 tribes of Israel. And this is how Jacob gave each of them their proper blessings. Jacob told his sons,
Soon I will die, and I want you to bury me in Machpelah cave. Abraham bought this cave as a burial place from Ephron the Hittite, and it is near the town of Mamre in Canaan. Abraham and Sarah are buried there, and so are Isaac and Rebekah. I buried Leah there too. Both the cave and the land that goes with it were bought from the Hittites.
When Jacob had finished giving these instructions to his sons, he lay down on his bed and died. Genesis 50. Joseph started crying, then leaned over to hug and kiss his father. Joseph gave orders for Jacob's body to be embalmed, and it took the usual 40 days. The Egyptians mourned 70 days for Jacob. When the time of mourning was over, Joseph said to the Egyptian leaders,
If you consider me your friend, please speak to the king for me. Just before my father died, he made me promise to bury him in his burial cave in Canaan. If the king will give me permission to go, I will come back here.
The king answered,
Go to Canaan and keep your promise to your father.
When Joseph left Goshen with his brothers, his relatives, and his father's relatives to bury Jacob, many of the king's highest officials and even his military chariots and cavalry went along. The Israelites left behind only their children, their cattle, and their sheep and goats. After crossing the Jordan River and reaching Atad's threshing place, Joseph had everyone mourn and weep 7 days for his father. The Canaanites saw this and said,
The Egyptians are in great sorrow.
Then they named the place Egypt in sorrow. So Jacob's sons did just as their father had instructed. They took him to Canaan and buried him in Machpelah cave, the burial place Abraham had bought from Ephron the Hittite. After the funeral, Joseph, his brothers, and everyone else returned to Egypt. After Jacob died, Joseph's brothers said to each other,
What if Joseph still hates us and wants to get even with us for all the cruel things we did to him?
So they sent this message to Joseph.
Before our father died, he told us, You did some cruel and terrible things to Joseph, but you must ask him to forgive you.
Now we ask you to please forgive the terrible things we did. After all, we serve the same God that your father worshipped.
When Joseph heard this, he started crying. Right then, Joseph's brothers came and bowed down to the ground in front of him and said,
"We are your slaves."
But Joseph told them,
"Don't be afraid. I have no right to change what God has decided. You tried to harm me, but God made it turn out for the best, so that he could save all these people as he is now doing. Don't be afraid. I will take care of you and your children."
After Joseph said this, his brothers felt much better. Joseph lived in Egypt with his brothers until he died at the age of 110. Joseph lived long enough to see Ephraim's children and grandchildren. He also lived to see the children of Manasseh's son Machir, and he welcomed them into his family. Before Joseph died, he told his brothers,
"I won't live much longer, but God will take care of you and lead you out of Egypt to the land he promised Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Now promise me that you will take my body with you when God leads you to that land."
So Joseph died in Egypt at the age of 110. His body was embalmed and put in a coffin.